Get it, you feed me?
Blue line checks. Tomas whittles in. He scores! What a goal! Metro! He struck Carey Price and then the bar. Are you kidding me?
You must be kidding me.
Did you just do that, Alexander Barkov?
What a stop by Lundqvist! What a goal!
It doesn't get any better than this.
Welcome back to the Fantasy Hockey Podcast. I'm your host, Gamby, with my co-host, Brandon, as always, and we're doing a special RFA episode. So as everyone knows, there's a few RFAs that are holding out. Point just signed today as we're recording this podcast, sort of.
Shortened this episode a bit.
Yeah, it's shortened it just a little bit, but we're going to be talking about the 4 big RFAs that are still holding out, when to take them.
And also Dustin Byfuglien.
And Dustin Byfuglien. So kind of just hold out. So we'll talk about how much we're fading them, how much you should fade them in different types of leagues. And then we'll also talk about the replacements if, say, they miss the start of the season. So just people to put on watch. And then the other thing that we wanted to mention, a few things. So there's a lot of preseason content out there. If you're finding us through this episode or you're new to the podcast, go back and listen to the Sleepers episodes, the Safe Picks episodes. Those are all really good content. There's also draft strategy episodes. And if you go back a little farther, there's a keeper league strategy episode. So if you're specifically in a keeper or dynasty league, there's an episode for you. It's just farther back. So go back and listen to that. And aside from that, also, we do now have a YouTube channel. So if you look up Fantasy Hockey Podcast on YouTube, we're posting all our drafts there, so you can watch along while we draft. We talk through our strategy when making picks. We also do mock drafts on there, so that's where you can go and just watch us draft in real time. We don't put all of them on the podcast, so that's where you go to watch those, and they're really useful, especially when we start getting into these competitive listener league ones, because watching a competitive draft and the strategy behind that is very different from a mock draft. So that's a really good resource as well for everyone that listens, is our YouTube channel now, where we're also putting our episodes in case you like to listen there. Who knows? Anyways, okay, so we're going to get into RFAs here. I think we're going to start in Calgary, right?
Yep. Let's go alphabetically.
Okay, so let's do that. So jump us into Matthew Tkachuk.
So I think the funny thing is about Tkachuk is we kind of disagree on his value in general. I think I'm fading him a little further than you are, just because of we've talked about how Calgary in general last season was shooting a little high, including Tkachuk. So the idea of where to draft him now that he's still holding out, I'm way less worried about Tkachuk than I am about like the Line A's of the world, for example. Like Line A has got to be the one I'm most concerned about at this point. But as far as how much I would change my drafting around Tkachuk, I don't think I would slide him down too far. Maybe push him another round. So if you're going to draft him in the 5th, then you could probably wait till the 6th and still be okay with him. But I wouldn't fade him much further than that, because I do think he's going to sign. I mean, we haven't seen too much about them actually. He's like skating in the OHL right now, but I still think that he might not be there on the first day, but you know what? I think he is going to be there the first day. My instincts tell me he's going to sign before the season starts. So I wouldn't fade him too much. I think so too.
Especially with the fact that Braden Point just signed. It helps a lot. I'm not worried too much about Matthew Tkachuk. I think of all the RFAs, he's probably, well, we'll get to Rantanen and explain why I'm not as worried about him. But with Matthew Tkachuk, I'm not that worried about him. I think if it were a tiebreaker in which, especially in a Bangers league, like Matthew Tkachuk, I think you can make up his, like, let's say, I think yesterday, for example, I was in a draft and I was between Matthew Tkachuk and I forget who. And the tiebreaker kind of was that Tkachuk isn't signed. But the thing to remember too with all these RFAs is when you have someone like, say, Rantanen or like Tkachuk, when you're not really afraid of them signing at some point soon, like I don't think he's going to be a Nylander, for example, who holds out until middle of the season. When you're not really afraid of that, it's fine. You may struggle a little bit at the beginning of the season, but then you're going to get back a super, super good player and most likely at value. And it's not going to be that long that it's going to hurt your playoff chances. And so players like that, to me, it's like it's all personal risk level. Like, how much risk do you want to take on? And also, it's about how your team is composed. If your team composition is solid, and let's say you're having a great draft so far, then you can take on that extra risk of Tkachuk. If you're not that happy with your draft so far, then that's where I think sometimes I think about it a little bit more and say, I'd rather wait around more and get a sure guy here. But, you know, if we're looking at a holdout from him, I think it's max a month into the season, and that's not going to hurt your playoff chances. It's like 3 weeks because Yahoo does a condensed 1 week. ESPN might not, so that's 4 weeks, but still, you know, you're not missing that much.
Right. On the other hand, though, if he does hold out for some reason, I don't think we even really know who to expect on that top power play. I think if he does hold out, I think whoever winds up on the top power play in Calgary is probably going to be worth some short-term value, streamer stuff. I wouldn't expect anything long-term because, again, I do expect Tkachuk to sign at some point. So if you wind up with, the first name that pops in my head of who winds up there is Sam Bennett. I mean, he might be okay short-term because of the exposure, especially considering he'll probably get top 6 role as well because of this. But once Tkachuk signs, he's droppable. The other option would be Dylan Dubé. But
yeah, Dubé is interesting. He's the more offensively gifted player, in my opinion, compared to Sam Bennett. And, you know, we've seen Sam Bennett's role switch in the last few years, and he's been more of like a third line, almost more of a defensive player in a sense. And on the power play, he's slightly effective. Last year, he was okay. Not anything incredible. If you look at Hockey Viz, he's kind of average. But he is a good offensive player as well. He's a good underlying stats guy. Like, I see him as a super solid third line, go out there and grind it out kind of guy who can get you good offense but also play good defense. So I think that, and last year we saw that he dipped more into like a third line role. Right. So in my opinion, I see Dubé as the one that gets the shot at top power play. But again, I think like you said, it's really up in the air right now. It's really just to watch both of those guys, and you'll be able to grab either one at your draft. I mean, the thing too with Dubé is I think Dubé would get better 5-on-5 deployment. So I'm hoping Dubé were to get the top power play because he'd probably get better 5-on-5 deployment and the top power play. I think if you're looking at Sam Bennett getting the top power play, then most likely you're seeing, then you're looking Sam Bennett getting, you know, third line and top power play. And that's not as exciting as, you know, a Dubé who's an offensive powerhouse with top power play.
Well, he has been skating a little bit of that top right wing. They've been talking about Lindholm in the center. I don't know if I buy any of that at the moment, but another interesting option would be if they put Backlund there. Now, if they did that, Backlund has always been like the quintessential guy to stream when Calgary has 4 games because he's always like consistently decent, but never quite rosterable. If he gets that top power play, he actually becomes pretty good, I think. Again, he's a center, so if you have positions broken out, it's kind of hard to recommend him if you don't have the room, especially in standard Yahoo leagues. But if you have utility spots or you have generic forward spots or whatever, I don't think this happens just because I don't know who would be centering that second power play. You'd have basically the 3 best centers that they have sitting on the top power play in Monahan, Lindholm, and Backlund. So, I mean, I guess you could throw like a Derek Ryan at it or something. I guess if Dubé's playing, you could make him center the second. I don't know. It doesn't seem super likely to me, but it's a possibility. But again, this is all, none of these guys would I recommend drafting because A, we don't know who's going to be there at the moment. And B, we still expect Tkachuk's going to show up. So this is more of like a see what happens in the first game and kind of react. Or once the first lines come out, maybe if you're in a really deep league, you can take a swing early. But beyond that, there's probably not a lot of action to be taken here as opposed to some of the other teams that we'll talk about. Specifically Winnipeg, where it seems like everything's happening. But instead of going there, let's go to Colorado next, as it is alphabetically next. The obvious holdout, the only holdout, is Mikko Rantanen. I think you've got more thoughts on what's going to happen here than I do, but yeah, what do you have to say about him?
So I have a lot of thoughts on Mikko Rantanen. And I was posed this question a few days ago on Reddit, and I gave it a lot of thought, and I gave the answer a lot of thought. And my end result was that of all the RFAs that are holding out, he's the one that scares me the least. And there's a few reasons for that. Even if he were to hold out until, say, middle of the year or whatever, you're still getting a player at the end of the day that is going to be a top line, is going to be top power play, how good he is. He meshes so well with McKinnon. So you're talking about getting potentially a top 20 guy back for the playoffs, right? I'll take that all day. It's very different from the Nylander situation where you didn't know what you were going to get when he came back, right? You didn't know where his deployment was going to be, and he's still disappointed when he came back. I don't think that's the case with Rantanen. I still think that when he comes back, he will be elite. Now, of course, the question is, when does he come back? I don't expect him to hold out till the middle of the year. I think the thing that's holding it up right now is Rantanen's looking at the landscape and everyone's getting bridge deals. And Colorado's looking at it and saying, well, we have cap space and we have a plan and we want to sign you long term. And apparently, Dater says it's not true, one of the beat writers for Colorado. But then there's another source who said that they offered him a 6 to 8 year deal. So it seems to be, I think, that even if they didn't make that deal to him, it seems to be that Colorado wants, a 6 to 8 year deal, a longer one, whereas Rantanen's looking at everything and saying, no, you know what? No, I want to get paid again in 3 years. And so that's I think the big question mark and what's going on right now. And arguably, to me, I think Rantanen's better than Marner. Maybe a hot take.
Yeah, I mean, the data backs it up if you look at the visuals for his isolated stuff. But
so I think it's really easy for Rantanen to point to Marner and say, pay me like Marner. I think that's very reasonable. And I think that's where Colorado's going to get in a little bit of a bind is I think they recognize that he's, as valuable. I don't think we'll see him go anywhere aside from Colorado. That's the other thing is of all the RFAs too, I'm least worried about Colorado losing Rantanen to either an offer sheet or a trade or whatever. Like, I don't think it's going to happen. I think Rantanen stays in Colorado. So again, you're like almost guaranteeing he plays with McKinnon. So with Rantanen, I would take him just around value. I think I've seen him fall a little bit. I've seen some people reach for him in like the second round. I would like him more in like the third round just to, there's a little bit of risk, right? And so I'd like to count that risk in. And I think around the third round is fine still. But
yeah, like I said, for him. I'd love to get him in the third.
Yeah, I don't think he's that much of a risk of all the people. I don't risk. With Tkachuk, it's the same thing, right? There's a risk of what happens if they split up the power play or, that second line gets worse. Whatever happens, like there are risks with Tkachuk. With Rantanen, there's no risks, in my opinion, once he comes back. And you're getting an elite player, at least for the last half of the season, if that's worst case scenario. So, yeah. And as far as, like, I think what's happening in Colorado, I think you have a better sense of what's happening on the top line if he holds out, because it is slightly interesting.
I mean, they've been trying Burakovsky up there. This is like the opposite of when the Flyers were trying to force, or in my opinion, they were trying to force Connecting to sign when they were like, Farabee is great. He's been awesome at top right wing and blah, blah, blah. I don't think you can realistically say that Burakovsky is going to be amazing at this point. I mean, there's still upside, I guess, but I don't think even if Rantanen held out and the fact they're trying Burakovsky on that top line, I can't imagine it sticks. I feel like they just try somebody else. But I mean, if it does, as of right now, he is the top right wing in Colorado, from last I've seen, which likely means top power play as well. If that stays, if Rantanen does hold out, I mean, he's worth not a flyer, but he's worth a waiver pickup, I guess, for the time being. Just because of exposure, he gets to play with anybody playing with McKinnon is pretty much worth something. So it'd be weird. It would feel very strange to roster Burakovsky, but
yeah. The problem with Burakovsky for me is he's just not a great offensive driver. He's a really good defensive player, actually. Over the last year at least, his defensive impact was far below average, the threat levels against were far below average, which is a good thing. He was really good defensively as a forward. So I'm hesitant on Burakovsky. I still think that even if he were playing with that line, I'm not sure how much of an impact he'd have on that line. I think you'd see Landeskog and McKinnon have more of a connection than including Burakovsky on that connection. So we'll see. But again, like I said, I don't expect Rantanen to hold out that long, and I think as RFA dominoes fall, we'll get closer to a domino falling for Rantanen as well.
Yep. All right, should we move on to the big team then that has three holdouts, and two of them are RFAs at this point?
Yeah, so let's move on to Winnipeg. How about we start first with the biggest holdout, which is Dustin Byfuglien.
Oh man, I honestly think if Dustin Byfuglien doesn't come back, the Jets may have the worst defense in the entire league. It's at least top three.
I think that's a little too strong.
Who do you think is good besides Morrissey?
I like Niku. I think he's fine.
He's not ready to be in any type of major role. He was bad last season. They just don't have anybody. Like Beaulieu is their only positive WAR player last season, which is crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I like Morrissey. I like Beaulieu.
Beaulieu is just...
I like Niku personally, but
these guys are all...
I agree with you. I don't think he's
They're
fantastic.
all 6th or 7th defensemen. All of them, except for Morrissey.
Yeah.
That's the only... you could obviously argue Ottawa, but at least they've got Chabot and Brandstrom, who hopefully will be doing something, but it's bad. It's bad. Really, really bad.
Yeah. And I think that for that reason too, when I've seen a lot of talk about Morrissey being immediately draftable, or him being slept on. He's an immediate pickup or something like that, which as a pickup, I see it. As a draft, I don't know. It really depends on where. I think that when you look at Morrissey's effectiveness on the power play, he's not great. He's actually not a very good power play defenseman.
It would do Winnipeg very well to make a trade.
Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw Pionk top power play.
Yeah, that could happen as well.
Pionk was good on the power. I
don't want to own him anymore. You don't want to say you like Pionk anymore.
No, it's not that I don't like Pionk. He's a terrible. The last year I only liked him because of the situation.
He's in the casket out back behind your house.
We may see the same situation this year, though.
No markings on the grave.
We may see a similar situation as last year with Pionk, where he gets top power play third pairing. And yeah, I like Winnipeg's power play way more than I like the Rangers power play, and he was good on the Rangers power play. So there could be upside there. So for Morrissey, I think I've seen a lot of people get really hyped about him. I don't buy it yet. And the reason is simply because, one, we don't know that he's going to get top power play. I think it's safe to assume he will, but Pionk is not. Pionk is good offensively, and I wouldn't be surprised if they at least tried Pionk up there. And the thing with that is, if Morrissey was already going to get even strength top pairing, right? So when you look at the projections out there, that's already factored in. It was already factored in that Morrissey was going to be, one of the main guys 5-on-5. Now what you're seeing is, okay, maybe more power play time. So I don't see that huge of a bump, and that isn't even guaranteed. So yes, draft him maybe really late or something like that. But
yeah, definitely in the double digits.
I don't see him as like a. I don't know if I see him as like a third defenseman. Honestly,
double digits of rounds. I mean, like
yes,
somewhere above 10.
Yes, somewhere around there. Like, use your projections, see how he fits in depending on your roster composition, or how your league is all set up and whatnot. But I would proceed with caution about all these things that you're seeing about Morrissey being an immediate pickup. He's being hyped way past his abilities, in my opinion, at least from a fantasy player.
Yeah, and he'll get you good blocks, but in standard Yahoo Cats, he's his peripherals are not very good. He's not a big shooter. He's not a big hitter. If you have blocks, and of course he should see an increased ice time even over his 22 and whatever it was minutes last season. So that'll help to an extent, but I still don't think he's going to be a guy that's going to fire the puck a lot. It's just not in his nature. So we'll see him get a lot of blocks. His hits might go up a little bit. His shots might go up a tad, but you got to realize he's coming with mediocre peripherals unless you have blocks in your league. So there's that. And then if he does lose top power play, he's immediately below replacement probably.
Yeah. I mean, my projections already had him getting 12 power play points.
That seems high unless Byfuglien got injured.
That's already pretty good. I mean, if you look at Byfuglien last year in 42 games played, he got 16. So that's already pretty high. So how much more can he go? Can he get 20? Maybe, if he's there all season. But yeah, and then as far as Byfuglien goes, honestly, right now, I'm not drafting him. To be completely honest, I'm not touching him.
I would still draft this. This is when you talk about risk versus reward, this is the biggest possible gamble because he's okay. Let me start first with, if it's a PIMS league, I'm more interested in taking this chance. If it's just a standard Yahoo league or something where it's just shots and hits, or even worse, if it's just points only or something like that, then you can totally fade him or not draft him or whatever. In a PIMS league, he is the defensive definition of a multi-cat monster. He does everything. So I still think it's worth gambling if you feel like your core is good enough to risk it in maybe the 8th or 9th round. In the league we had yesterday, he went even higher than that. I think he went in the 6th or 7th, which is a little, considering at this point, I feel like I mean, I don't know. I honestly feel like it's more likely he retires than he doesn't, but there's still, there's a chance that he doesn't retire. There's a chance he plays half the season. There's weird stuff could happen. So I would still take a flyer on him at some point in most leagues, but you gotta do it knowing that that's an 100 or 0 play. Like there's no, you're either getting him or you're not.
So here's my take on that is my issue with Byfuglien is a few things. One, I agree with you. I think he's going to retire. I don't think you suspend him and do all these things and, it gets out into the news and everything if there's not a very, very strong likelihood that he's retired.
They had to suspend him. They had no choice.
Right. But what I'm saying is like it seems like everything is kind of pointing towards retirement, right? The other thing is it takes a long time for people. We've seen this in the past. We saw it with Nylander last year and other people who have held out. It takes a while for people to get back into hockey shape. I mean, the NHL is not easy, and it takes people a while. And especially at the age Byfuglien's at, with the injuries he's had, it's going to take him a while. And on top of that, I mean, you have to assume. So there's reports of him potentially retiring because he's lost the love of the game. Could it also have to do with injuries? Sure, but that's pure speculation. But regardless, like I do worry about his injuries. Like he was injured a lot last year. I think aside from it, like you're taking a guy who hasn't been in training camp, is going to miss time, is going to take time to get back in. His injury risk is going to be increased, whether you like it or not. That's just the nature of the sport. Is if you haven't been practicing, you're not up to speed. Like your injury risk increases, and his injury risk was already high enough. So for me, I don't even see it as that. I don't know if I see it as that high of upside as it'd be. Like I would only take him, I think, as one of my last defensemen. I don't like him in the 6th round or anywhere like that. Even in a PIMS league, I just feel that the risk is way too high. Oh, there's
one thing to mention about all these guys real quick. If you're in Yahoo and you're not using IR plus, like it's just a mistake at this point. I think I get that it's annoying that people can throw guys on day to day and make a pickup or whatever, but I think that's worth it considering we've seen so many times where Yahoo leaves guys marked as out or leaves guys, whatever that should be IR eligible that are not because of just how the system works. So IR plus allows you to put anybody that's out. I don't know about suspensions, but for any other reason, you can stuff them into IR plus. And for these guys, these RFA holdouts, if you don't have IR plus, they're just going to be eating a spot on your roster, dead spot. So if you have IR plus, like the risk is mitigated to an extent a little bit more. Obviously with Byfuglien, this is a bigger question, but for the other RFAs that we expect all of them will sign at some point, it's way less risky if you can stash them.
Yep.
But
speaking of RFAs, let's move into the 2 RFAs on Winnipeg, which is Patrik Laine and Kyle Connor. I think we can start with Laine for a quick second, and he is the one that scares me the most.
Oh yeah,
to hold out the longest,
because I think traded or something like
you really don't know with Laine. Like legitimately don't know what's up with Laine.
I wouldn't be surprised if Laine's like status is tied to some extent to what Byfuglien decides. Because if Byfuglien retires, like how do they have any choice other than to trade for a defenseman? I don't.
But I don't think they need to trade Laine for that.
They don't need
think that's
to,
a given.
But like I think it very much increases the likelihood if Byfuglien were to retire.
I think more my issue is Laine has spoken somewhat pretty negatively about Winnipeg and his time in Winnipeg. And there was actually a really interesting article that came out a few weeks ago. I think it was The Athletic that was talking about how tight the locker room is, and that the locker room is insanely tight. And they run a really tight ship there between like Wheeler, Scheifele and Byfuglien being captains and everything. And they have like zero tolerance for BS or for attitude or anything, like zero tolerance for all that. And that's a large reason they said that Kane was let go. Yep. All the talent in the world, but he has an attitude and a personality, and they didn't like that. And so it was apparently they made it seem like it was largely a team decision, a team push to get Kane out. And that made me think a lot about Laine, and you hear what he's saying. And if that's true, that the locker room is so tight and they don't really put up with anything, then you got to question, are they thinking about from a team chemistry standpoint or a locker room chemistry standpoint, is Laine the odd one out?
Yep.
Is it causing more problems than he's helping? And I mean, Byfuglien yelling, "You got to move." I know we joke about it, but you don't see that. you don't see that very often in a team where a player is calling someone out on the ice like that. And so there's just so many question marks with Laine. He is the one that scares me the most, from, like you said, trade, from holding out until he doesn't seem like he cares right now to sign. Like, he doesn't seem like he's in a rush.
The funny thing about this is I feel like a trade is good news for him at this point if you were to draft him.
Yes.
But
yeah, I'm personally not taking, I like his goal upside. The problem is you don't know where he's going to be. I do think that wherever he goes, he'd be a top line player. Whether he's earned that or not, I don't think so. But, I think if you're going to trade for him, you're only trading for him to be a top line player, I believe. And so it's an interesting case, and it's difficult. I don't know exactly where he's going to end up. And personally, I'm fading him pretty hard. Not because he's not good. It's just there's so many question marks with him and question marks about, like I said, team chemistry. How well is he meshing? Let's say he does sign. Well, now there's a lot of question marks on team chemistry. He himself admits he doesn't really like playing with Little very much. He said it in minced words or whatever, and maybe it was a little bit directed because the writer who asked that question has apparently had a vendetta against Little for a long time. But weird. Nonetheless, that's out there. So there's just so many question marks, and I'm not buying on Laine this year. Not because we don't like him. I think if he were signed with Laine, like I said really before, like him, but I think his value right now is perfect.
I liked him at fifth. He's that's always been my thing. I think I feel like last night he went fourth, and that he's still going fourth even with his holdouts. But
yeah, his ADP is like 45. I think it's fallen to like 47-ish. I haven't checked, but somewhere around there. So he's fallen to the fifth round, which if he were signed,
47 is the end of the fourth.
Yeah, so around that is fine to me. Like, I think he's going fine value. It's just unsigned. I don't care for it. And then moving on to Kyle Connor, I drafted him yesterday pretty late. I don't remember exactly where I got him.
It was like 12th or 13th round.
It was really late. I'm not afraid of Connor. Because there's a few reasons I'm not afraid of Connor. One, he's going to be top line, most likely still, most likely top power play. We've seen what he can do. Not a lot of peripherals. And I mean, right now, if I'm getting him like 12th round, for example, zero fear there. That's like, that I would take him earlier than that. And he fills out, he's a really good option late where if you're struggling a little bit in points, let's say you're looking at the draft leaderboard on our tool and you see, okay, I'm doing a little bit poorly in points. He's a great grab late that, will kind of fill that at some point in the season. And so Connor is interesting to me. Of course, you can immediately put him on IR plus if that's an issue. And I think and there's been talk of him getting offer sheeted recently. And that makes sense because he's going to be the cheapest of all the RFAs. And I think that Winnipeg will match pretty much anything anyone puts on the table for Winnipeg, because no one's going to go over the edge in an offer sheet to give up so much for Connor. It's going to be a reasonable offer, which means Winnipeg will probably match whatever reasonable offer he gets. I
do wonder if he does get cheated, if it's going to be some like term shot at the organization, like with Aho, like a 5-year term, it benefits the player a lot. That'll be interesting.
Potentially. There was rumors that Columbus is looking at offer sheets. So, but I don't think they'll let him go. I think he stays in Winnipeg, and regardless, I think wherever he goes, he's a good player. He's a good player on his own. So I think wherever he goes, he'll be like a top line guy and play well. So I'm not, especially he's going so late. He's not like the other RFAs where it's like, oh, are you risking a 6th round pick on him? No, he's going like 10th, 12th round. So you don't have to worry too much, at least in a bangers league, and especially in a points league. I mean, in a points league, if he's fallen that far, he's an absolute steal. So that's definitely he's one of the RFAs I'm not that afraid of.
Yeah. However, with either one of them holding out, I think the big benefactor is Nikolai Ehlers, who still has a really, really late ADP and has decent upside, even if they both come back. Not great, but he does shoot a lot. And the big thing would be, I think, ideally for him would be that, well, actually, if for some reason Laine signed and Connor didn't, it'd probably be Laine to the top line, but it's possible that he would get that top line shot. I kind of doubt it, but if neither one of them sign in some crazy alternate universe, he would get top line and top power play, which would be insane. But if one of them doesn't or is traded, then he will likely get top power play, which should be a nice boost to his value. And he has left wing, right wing, which is nice as well. So that, like, I think of all the like options with these holdouts, Ehlers is the best one by like a wide margin, because there's the best chance that he actually winds up being able to benefit from one of these guys either being traded or not signing. And he's already a pretty good player at a very cheap price. It's just like last season, I feel like we saw him go in the 8th round, and he had another whatever season, but he still has that like 8th round value possible, like that upside of that, especially if he gets top power play. So I do like the idea of taking a swing on him. You can get him so late. So with one of your last picks, take a swing with him.
Okay, and that's the RFA holdouts. There's not that much there this year, at least. It's not as bad, it seems, as the Nylander situation. I think this year's Nylander could be Laine, if anybody.
Tell it's not bad to Winnipeg right now. I just imagine everything's on fire there, and people are just screaming, and it's gone like full Lord of the Flies over there.
I mean, I don't know. Their press conferences are fun. Paul Maurice and Blake Wheeler are the spiciest press conference players and coaches I've ever seen.
I love them. I love that comment about somebody said they spotted Byfuglien eating somewhere, and Paul Maurice was like, he was eating? That bastard.
I love the attitude they're taking to everything. Even after Laine called out Little, Wheeler was like, you know what? I'm going to answer this question. I'm going to walk away and never think about it again. It was like, I love their attitude towards it. Anyways, there you go. Be sure to join the Discord. Follow us on Twitter at FantasyHockeyPD for us to help you out with your draft. People are also rating teams in there all the time, so be sure to join that. And other than that, we'll see you for the next episode. The next episode is actually going to be waiver wire targets to start the season, so players you should watch, and that'll come towards the end of the week as we know more about rosters and RFAs.
We might slide a draft in somewhere there. Maybe.
Yes, we may actually slide a draft in there. So
the next one we know is going to happen will be waiver wire targets.
Yes. So just keep an eye on the podcast. Things will happen. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Fantasy Hockey Podcast, brought to you by myself and my co-host, Brandon Stockenborg. If you liked this episode or others, please leave us a review. It's the #1 way to help the podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at FantasyHockeyPD. Join our Fantasy Hockey Discord channel, play in a listener league with us by becoming a patron, and check out all our tools on FantasyHockeyPodcast.com. All research courtesy of Dauber, Daily Faceoff, Hockey Reference, Hockey Viz, Natural Stat Trick, Evolving Hockey, and RotoWire. Intro song is by Avicii, and the outro is by Deadmau5. Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you next time.